Hello and welcome back. Sean here, Mountains Garage, on a nice, quiet Sunday afternoon. Getting used to the time as we changed it last night while we were sleeping. But that's okay, it's late in the afternoon. I'm finishing up in the shop and just gonna update you and myself in the future when I go back and try to figure out everything I've done. I watch my own videos, believe it or not. So I picked up more parts, no big surprise there. Shopping all the time, looking for affordable deals. Affordable is, put that in bunny ears, rabbit ears. But last time we talked, let's finish up on the cylinder heads. I was going to finish assembling the second head, which I did. A few things of interest in as far as at least the Ilmor engineering engines, and it's applicable to what you have for a block. The GM LSX block, for the 4 extra head bolts that are external to the cylinder head, the added holes, on a LSX block, a GM block, that's a 10mm stud. When I got these heads, the holes were sized for the 10mm bolt. I already knew from messing with the other set of heads I had that the dot block runs a 3/8 bolt there, and the hole's not big enough. In the $560 head stud kit I bought from ARP, specific to the dot SHP block, they give you these little top hats. My glove is black, so it's hard to see it, but it's a piece of metal, looks like a top hat. And these are made if your head is 3/8, slightly larger than 3/8 to fit a 3/8 stud on a dot block, and you want to put it back on the LSX block, you put these in the hole, and that fills up the hole. So I recognize these because my Lenco transmission mounted on the bell housing had the same arrangement, only bigger. So they give you 8 of these. So now that I've modified these heads and bought them out to fit my 3/8 studs, if I ever get a GM LSX block, and I know where this little baggie is, I'll be able to use it there too. Otherwise the stud would be swimming in the hole and probably doesn't work quite as well. Moving on, I was shopping for a dry sump tank. Now I've never had a dry sump before, and I'm just learning as I go by, the internet mostly. I don't know anybody personally that has a lot of dry sump knowledge, but I'm figuring it out. There's enough information out there. And I determined, looking at a lot of tanks, this is the dry sump oil tank, that I wanted in the tank, you run the tank about 3/4 full. This is a 3-gallon tank, so that'd be 12 quarts. And I wanted 9 or 10 in the system, because the lines will be full and everything. But so I figured this size tank would be about what I wanted. So I was shopping for one. Used ones are typically beat up. Locally, while I was in Florida a few weeks ago, I found one here in New Hampshire, next door. This very tank. And the guy said it was brand new, $850 tank. And it was only lightly scuffed up from being mocked up. So again, I was in Florida, couldn't do anything about it, and he was pretty adamant he didn't want to ship it, so I was going to have to drive to this particular place in New Hampshire. It was further than I normally go when I visit the fine state, the Granite State. So I was thinking about it, and I shopped and shopped. All the used ones on eBay, most of them, a lot of them are in a stock cast, so all the fittings are different. You have to be mindful of, unless you want to spend a lot of time welding on it, what it actually has for fittings. So I knew this particular one was pretty much exactly what I wanted. So when I got back, I contacted I let a week and a half go by, then I contacted the guy in New Hampshire and told him if he'd be willing to ship it, I'd be interested in it. So he said, okay, I'll see if I can find a box. A few hours later, he sends me a picture of it in a box, and I have 12 pictures of it on my phone up to this point. He sent me every angle you can think of, except on the back side of the one, he had these welds were almost ground right through, like it was dragged on the road. I don't know what hit it or what happened to it, but that tank was, in my mind, not usable. And he wanted half what a new one cost, so by the time I ship it, I'm gonna have $500 in that tank that was junk. So I was starting again from nowhere. Shopping, and lo and behold, I found this tank. It was built 11/23. It was built November. It was half price. So shipped to my house, I paid less than, well, call it $450 for this tank. Sean's a happy guy, because this is exactly what I wanted. The fittings match up to my dry sump setup. Everything's gonna work fine. I have the clamps coming for it that mount it. They go around the whole thing. They're, you know, 2 for $100, but probably they're, you know, cushioned, and probably by the time I made something, I'd have half to 3/4 of that into it plus time. So that's that. I'm still deciding on whatever dry sump pump drive. I got a 4-inch V-belt pulley coming for this one. This is my 1-inch mandrel. Takes a 1/8 inch keyway. And I got 2 of these NASCAR ones. I was intrigued by the serpentine belt, attempting to potentially run a stock water pump. Let me spin you around. Let's talk about that. The factory LS water pump is somewhat complicated because the water in and out of the block all goes through the pump, unlike other Chevy engines anyway, where the water exits up in the cylinder head. On an LS, it all goes through the water pump. So in and out changes a few things. I was intrigued, like I said, about running the serpentine drive. I don't have my motor plate on here, but I've already done some measuring. And with a 3/4 spacer, I can make this Camaro pump work. That's the long story short. It could be done. It has advantages and disadvantages. You know, street driving, it's probably an advantage not having an electric pump that might fail. I mean, water pumps fail as well, but again, the LS water pump being kind of complicated, you can plug off the heater lines. As long as you leave a thermostat in the factory housing, everything works fine. You remove the thermostat, things get a little weird. So you probably stuck running some kind of thermostat or modified thermostat to make the flow through the pump correct. So my next thought process, because the electric pumps for an LS engine, one of the rare LS parts that are not inexpensive compared to other stuff. It's actually the most expensive water pump out there, probably. There's cheaper versions, and I don't want to be street driving with a pump that's prone to failure too much anyway. So basically a Mazir was maybe the only option. They rate theirs by the hours they should last, 3,000 to 5,000 hours. They flow more water. That's the one with the electric motor that bolts right on the engine, and there's in and out ports, no adapters required. They sell an adapter to put where the water pump would go on an LS to bolt on a big block Chevy pump, but the additional fittings you need, because a big block Chevy pump only has the lower hose, you still need an upper hose, and with an LS you got to run one on each side, so the fittings get really tight. You got to grind the pump. It ends up looking and probably functioning less than stellar. So I was seriously thinking about running a remote water pump down on the frame or on the radiator itself, until I happened across, after finding the awesome deal on that oil tank, a brand new Mazir in the box. It's not even here yet, but self-contained, bolt it right on the engine. It'll take AN fittings, so I can run nice, you know, make a radiator or get a radiator that has -16 AN fittings, and I will be styling. So moving forward, I think through all this, I'm trying to make it as streamlined as possible to go from an LS to a small block to a big block, and the front motor mount is a big part of that. So let's see what I've mocked up there. I save every scrap of chrome moly tubing I've ever had. which isn't a whole lot, but I fixed my orange Camaro 10 years ago, saved every piece of that. Included in that, I had this much of a length of 1 3/8 chromoly tubing. The ID fits right over 1 1/4, so just a few minutes ago, I eyeballed the center and nailed it. Cut it in half on the bandsaw, still got 10 fingers. And I've been carefully whittling on my motor plate, so this actually slides underneath on the upper frame rail. And then I'm going to attach a bracket probably halfway. And then I had 4 of the correct clamps. This style clamp I like because as you crank it, it kind of winds inside each other. And I believe they're stronger than a regular hose clamp. I'm going to put one on each side, and my bracket will be in the middle. I wasn't totally in love with this idea, however, as recently as my Florida trip in the Daytona Speedway Museum, they have a drag racing section. There's a Don Garlett's Top Fuel dragster sitting there with a very similar motor mount set up and one regular hose clamp on it. So, good enough for that, good enough for me, and of course I'm going to double clamp it like I said, so it is what it is. I'll show you what it looks like in the car. I got it roughed in here. Haven't made a hole yet or anything or welded any bracket, but this needs to slide back a little bit. There'll be a clamp on either side. So that has potential, and in the future can slide it ahead for small block, slide it more for big block, and use the same bracket. These are the up and forward headers that I had out in the box. What I like about them is they're 1 7/8, not 1 3/4. I have extra cubic inches, so the bigger the better probably. I'm glad a off-the-shelf header fits. I'll have to modify, from there forward to my turbo. That's normal. Weld different V-bands on, adjust the length, whatever. Those are cheap headers. They start around $100 a set. I've been studying them. The differences in the cheap ones. The next step up seems to be like Jegs and Summit sell Flowtech. It's a better looking header, however, it's still made in China. And the American-made headers up and forward start around $1,200 up to $1,700 and up. So that'd be a dozen sets or more of the cheap ones. I was still torn thinking about it. I've built my own before. I could do it again out of components that I buy, which is not inexpensive or easy. But I have a jig and everything. I could do it, and I've done it. It's fun to a point, the first one, then you got to make a second one. But all that aside, from what I understand from people that make a lot of passes, that even the most expensive header built by the greatest professionals, after about 50 runs, they start cracking, maybe less. In that case, I got better off with a cheap header, and I'll just replace them if needed if I can't fix them. So it's my current thought process. I welcome yours. Again, if you're a dry sump expert, be sure to chime in. I love interaction. And that's going to do it for today. I guess we're caught up. As soon as I put this video together and watch it, I realized I should have said 3 or 4 different things. But I'll catch you in a couple days and we'll do it then.